Hello students, welcome to week 5 for PRL 580. This week we are looking at rethinking consumption practices for consumers in the international PR landscape. Week 5 agenda tells you you're reading Chapter 7 of the Curtin and Gaither text and Chapter 11 of the Golan text. You are also completing discussion board number 5 due on Friday with reply posts due on Sunday, as well as a reflective response assignment that's due on Sunday, as well as your global social media plan that's due on Sunday as well. It's important to keep working on your critical assignment that is due in week 8. We have about 3 weeks left until that is due, so please work on that. Assignment number 5 is another reflective response assignment asking you to look at public diplomacy and competitive identity within the Golan text, as well as the moment of consumption within the Curtin text. You'll take some ideas from each of those, discuss and define and share those terms according to what your knowledge is of that after the readings, as well as integrating in one communication or PR theory that helps provide the use of effective PR practice utilizing those concepts. This essay will be about 500 words and will also include outside sources. It is due on Sunday. Reflection number 5 is due on Friday with reply posts due on Sunday as well. In this response to the reading, you will be looking at how Chapter 7 explains that consumers actively decode PR campaign messages in reference to their own context, such as demographics and perceived saliency of the message to their lives, meaning how it is interpreted and applicable to their daily lives. It's important to explain in at least 400 words what that concept of consumers actively decoding PR messages means to you, and provide an example or show a proved example of this dynamic from your own experience of observation in media. So essentially, think about how consumers actively decode PR messages and then find an example of how that has provided a personal point of reference to you in your decoding of media and being an active consumer of media. The next assignment is the Global Social Media Plan. What's important here is that you need to create a social media plan for a business or nonprofit of your choice. This is a hypothetical situation, so you will need to provide some specifics in terms of a competitor analysis, what other competitors are doing, develop message strategy, and creating the plan to utilize either the ROPE, the RACE, or the RPI model, as well as sample posts. It's important that you look at the rubric within Blackboard, as well as creating some well-crafted communication messages to help your social media plan come to life. This project is worth 100 points, so do refer to a lot of the information in Blackboard for it. I wanted to spend some time looking at some concepts from the text. So in Chapter 7, we are looking at the idea of consumptions and how consumption can help rethink PR practice and identifying and the identification of publics. So it's important to know that the moment of consumption really encompasses how publics make use of a cultural artifact, such as a campaign issue or product, in their everyday lives and help form new meanings around it as a consequence of its use. Specifically, you can look at examples of school children in China and Singapore consuming McDonald's, but maybe not so much in the way that we would actively assume that they are consuming McDonald's. Many times school children in those countries do not visit McDonald's for the food or the playgrounds. Rather, since their living quarters are so small, they utilize McDonald's as a workplace to provide a place to spread out and do homework. This new meaning of McDonald's as a workspace emerged not from corporate campaigns or policy, but because of consumer use. We can now see this utilized in many different models of new McDonald's throughout the world, not just necessarily in those countries. So we look at the moment of consumption, determining how the public makes use of a cultural artifact, or which in this case in PR can be a campaign, issue, or product, and how in their everyday lives it forms new meanings around it. So it really refers to how brands or stores are being utilized for other models than they were originally designed for, or even just any kind of campaign. You may have decided to start a hashtag campaign, and it took on a life of its own and meaning of its own because of the moment of consumption really encompassed how the public made use of that cultural artifact. It's just really up for you to decide. You'll see that this idea of consumers as active participants is in constructing meaning is new. Typically, this PR is developed around utilizing a linear model of communication, and particularly a transmission view of communication, where communication takes place between two fixed points, beginning with a sender and a receiver. Laswell, 1948, said that who says what to whom and what channel with effect model really positions consumers or audiences as the passive recipients of communicated meaning. This has evolved significantly over time. Shannon and Weaver has shown us that if we take the EMDR, the SMR model, source message receiver model, where we focus on this linear communication taking place across a line, transmission of communication, that we can then really track and determine how communication is effective to the mass audiences. This is definitely in contrast to the idea of the moment of consumption and looking at how publics make use of cultural artifacts in their everyday life. Particularly the rope, the race, and the RPI models of public relations or strategic communication campaigns adhere to this concept of having a source, encoding that message, developing it for sending it off to appropriate communication mediums, Twitter, Facebook, television, print, whatever it may be, decoding it, and then the receiver understanding it. It looks as if there's a passive model of communication where the receiver is not actively involved in the communication process. That's what a lot of public relations campaigns and a lot of an old school approach to what PR was built around. And we still use it today because it is relevant in terms of how we get information out to the masses. However, it's important to look at this ritualistic view of communication, where communication is not really about the impartation of messages between a sender and receiver. Rather, it's designed to be an experience with another source and completed as part of a ritual. Carey, who is one of the founders in all these types of the different views of communications, found through his explorations with the transmission model that communication is actually deeper than what we found it to be in a linear perspective. It's not always linear, like it was found in the transition model. Rather, he said and he felt that scholars should consider the ritual of communication, not the transmission of it. We should gather oftentimes more information from the ritual, meaning the experience of communication, rather than considering what the transmission of communication is itself. Looking at this example of the moment of consumption really takes place to being relevant in this situation. If we look at the moment of consumption as encompassing how publics make use of a cultural artifact such as a campaign, issue, or product, and we see how that cultural artifact is used in their everyday life, it can form new meanings around it. Meaning we are going beyond just looking at the transmission of what the new McDonald's layout communicates to us and looking at it and see how it creates a ritual of communication. This also exists within looking at public relations and the ideas of consumption in that manner. And it's really important to know that the result is that consumption exists not in a binary opposition, but as equal integral parts of the process of circulation when considering the circuit of culture. So we're coming back to that again. It's important to know that consumers actively decode public relations campaign messages in reference to their own context, typically things like demographics, psychographics, political persuasions, tolerances, and their own cultural competencies and perceived salience to a message for their lives plays a huge role in how they decode PR messages. Specifically, consumption becomes both appropriation and resistance, taking in what resonates and resisting what doesn't. Bernays alluded to this notion when he observed that he didn't think of practitioners as powerful. Instead, he thought of them as people go where they want to be led. So as PR practitioners, people will go where they want to be led, so we need to make sure that we are leading them in the right idea and place for our organization. It's really important to know that when you think of the role of the role of public relations within an international landscape, that's important to know that from the moment of production, which was talked about in Chapter 6, there then is never fully realized until the moment of consumption. So production begins with the conceptualization of the moment of consumption, when consumers appropriate messages and create new meanings through their use. Consumption feeds new meanings back into campaign. It's not the end of a process, but rather it's the beginning of another, and thus itself a form of production. And so it's really important to look at that as consumer appropriation has driven to the production of many different ways that we do business and communicate. From a public relations perspective, it's not the end all, and that it's important to see how it's utilized in relation to looking at the role of relative power. It's important to see that the moment of consumption is that practitioners need to recognize the role of relative power within relationships, particularly those between producers and audiences, and understand that consumers, though active producers of meaning, seldom are empowered producers of meaning. Producers often have the upper hand in relationships and with consumers. So PR practitioners are usually employed by those with more relative power to make a two-way symmetric communication process less impossible. And so what you'll see is that it's people have expectations of what they desire to consume media with and to consume products from organizations, and it's the role of the PR practitioner to really get in there and see how these cultural artifacts develop and change the way the intended meaning may be of these ideas within the moment of consumption. It's important that as we look at things like this, we want to recap just some things that we need to be aware of. So as we look at it, consumption and production are two aspects of the same process. Consumers actively create meanings for products and issues through their everyday use, and campaign research is an ongoing process that needs to be addressed at all aspects of the campaign. Consumption and regulation are closely tied when organizations violate consumer norms, but new technologies are empowering and disempowering by the majority of the world still lacks access. So it's very important to see how the moment of consumption can be utilized in a profitable way for an organization. As we are looking at the week, it's important to see that we have Chapter 7 in our reading of the Curtin and Gaither text, as well as Chapter 11, and that we are completing discussion board number 5, assignment number 5, and global social media plan. If you have any questions, please reach out. I look forward to interacting with you this week. God bless.